just who is the mysterious figure behind Putin, behind the Wagner Group, and behind many of the Russian trolling attempts here in the US, and just what is his designs on the Kremlin. We're going to get into all that in this special edition of your Ukraine Daily Update. Let's do it. Okay, so one of the biggest influential power brokers under Putin is Yevgeny Prigozhin. And we've talked a lot about Prigozhin on this channel, but I've never really covered exactly who he is. And he's sometimes called Putin's chefs because his companies own considerable contracts with the state for dining and catering. He is a 61-year-old man who, of course, was born in Russia. What's interesting is that he has no military or even state security experience. That's what's one of the things that's most fascinating, despite the fact that currently his operations are thought to be tightly integrated with Russia's defense ministry and its intelligence arm, the GRU. But he was in fact born in Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg. It says he graduated from an athletics boarding school, which I think is actually a Russian like military or basically elite athlete training school, where he focused on cross-country skiing. But in 1979, he was actually given a suspended sentence for stealing, and then by 1981 was sentenced to 12 years in imprisonment for robbery, fraud, and involving teenagers in crime. It sounds like he may have had some sort of small petty crime network that he operated, or maybe was dealing in maybe stolen or gray market goods. You have to remember, in the 80s, the Soviet Union, something like 10 to 20% of their entire economy was considered gray market. These were transactions that were not officially recorded by the state, but they would involve tit-for-tat type exchanges. For example, hey, I have a friend who can get you a new raincoat, even though you can't find them at stores, but he wants 2 bottles of cognac. And they say, oh, okay, sure. I think that would be like 10 raincoats probably. But that's the sort of gray market that would occur. And it was actually a large portion, by the 80s, a large portion of the Soviet economy. And it's one of the reasons it is seen as more acceptable in the Russian military to sell a little bit of equipment or fuel on the side, because for most jobs in the Soviet Union by this time, there was an expectation that part of the compensation was just your access to these sort of off-the-books goods. However, he was released in 1990, and he and his stepfather set up a network to sell hot dogs. Anyway, these hot dogs meant that his rubles were piling up faster than his mother could count them. What a hot dog business. Truly an innovator. He became a 15% stakeholder and manager of what looks like a restaurant. A grocery chain. And then he became CEO of said grocery chain. They created casinos. They founded just all sorts of different operations using probably the proceeds from his hot dog distribution business. Anyway, they rolled out all sorts of restaurants, and that seems to be one of the ways in which he parlayed his hot dog money into restaurants, catering, fine dining, and probably if he actually did have some sort of access to cheap or lower priced imports, though again, Russia in this era after the fall of the Soviet Union could easily access European markets. By 2001, Prigozhin was serving food personally to Vladimir Putin. I think he realized that at some point he and his restaurant and hot dog money were actually so big that he could either he was so big that he could either be seen as a threat to the government or an asset to the government. And he realized by 2001 that he needed to be an asset to Vladimir Putin. And so he, of course, became just that. And Putin allowed him to engage. It says gave him permission to engage in illicit activities without fear of prosecution. And we'll see just what that means here in a minute. They think his illegal wealth is more than 1 billion rubles. And that, of course, is several $100 million. But when we move on, we see just why Putin allows him, of course, to get away with doing all sorts of quasi-legal things. It's because, first off, he owns the wet works, what we might call that for the Russian state. This is the Wagner Group, right? They're a private military contractor, but and they do things that would be unthinkable to the uniformed Russian military. For example, attacked U.S.-backed Kurdish forces and in an attempt to take an oil field in 2018. But they say the story says U.S.-backed Kurdish forces. This is not correct. They attacked U.S. forces who were backing up Kurdish forces who held an oil field. There's an account on, I think, Coffee or Die of the actual event in which the Wagner Group realized that they were not against the Kurds, but were actually against the U.S. It was Green Berets and some Marines. Let's see. Wagner Group. Yeah, let's see. Boom. Here we go. I'll try to link this below. Yeah, the time U.S. forces tore hundreds of Wagner Group mercenaries to pieces in Syria. This is sort of a clickbait title, but not that much. Not all that clickbaity. It was a 4-hour battle in which a small force of American commandos just butchered, but apparently 500 Wagner troops, 27 vehicles, and including T-72 tanks and APCs. So this was not a little friendly fire scuffle, but the Pentagon saw this happening, and of course, right, Rangers and Delta Force commandos were working alongside Kurdish and Arab forces, and then additional Marines and Green Berets 20 miles away were preparing to become their quick reaction force of just 16 troops, by the way, guys. So this is like a platoon. This isn't even a platoon. This is a squad. Imagine having 4 MRAPs and having to take on T-72s. That's some gangster stuff right there. But nonetheless, the notable, right, is that when the then Secretary of Defense contacted his Russian counterpart, the Russian counterpart said, hey, this isn't our people. And then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said that, okay, if this non-Russian force that's threatening our oil rig, we can be annihilated. And so that's, of course, the sort of wet works, plausible deniability stuff that Wagner Group specializes in. They often work with governments that the Russian state does not want to be affiliated with or cannot, for sanction reasons, explicitly support. But that's not all the Prigozhin is involved in. He's also involved in the notorious Internet Research Agency. This is the so-called Russian troll farms, where well, let's take a look at what it means to run a Russian troll farm. The Internet Research Agency, of course, is the iconic troll farm, but I'm strongly suspect that now that they're in the public, there are probably non-public iterations of the same sort of efforts. But this organization has done all sorts of different tactics to manipulate global public opinion. Just focused on the U.S., we see that they would schedule rallies, trying to encourage just general anti-government sentiment, and encourage more extremist stances. So, for example, they would organize protests for and against Trump, they would try to co-opt marginalized groups, such as, here's one where they created a Facebook page for American Muslims, where they tried to make them more extreme. They, would make memes alleging that, for example, a missile strike in Syria by the United States against a chemical weapons facility was actually part of some sort of larger campaign against Muslims. And this is classic IRA tactics, right? They also ran Instagram accounts for both sides, right? One, for example, an Instagram account called Woke Blacks, okay? And another one called Miners for Trump, the Miners, MINERS. But just sort of classic moves to just sort of increase the level, raise the temperature of the political discourse in these countries. But they also the Internet Research Agency, is involved in other things. So yes, they obviously show up in English and just try to get people worked up, right? It says here, one former worker said that the favorite topics were guns, immigrants, and homosexuality, the kind of topics that invoke blind and negative emotions. He said that 1 minute you had to pretend to be a redneck from Kentucky, then later you had to be some kind of white dude from Minnesota, and then 15 minutes later you had to be from New York writing something in what he describes as quote, black slang. And right, but this has been going on. See, this was how things were operating in 2015. And it's been going on since then. There is now, it looks like it's more sophisticated in let's see, this is an article from 2021, so 2 years ago. And you can see that the tactics have remained the same, but things have changed just a little bit. They're now a little more sophisticated. First off, they are using multiple phones, multiple SIM cards, VPNs, and probably if you are this well funded and backed by the Russian state, there's probably a little bit more punch to what you're doing. There's probably a lot more machine learning, a lot more algorithms governing things, right? People creating entire fake identities using stolen photographs that are manipulated so they don't come up on image searches. And, all in all, these guys will run hundreds of fake accounts just in order to push a certain narrative, either a pro-Russian narrative in all sorts of different places. And if you look even in my comments, you see that these sort of activities are very, very, very common. If you sort by new, you'll see there are always extremely negative, sometimes extremely pro-Russian, but oftentimes they're literally just negative. They'll point out, for example, tiny meaningless errors in my commentary and try to argue that therefore my entire body of work should be ignored. There's all sorts of tactics they use now, and I suspect that we only really know a fraction of the IRA's tactics. And because someone like Prigozhin is very sophisticated and you don't stay in power as long as he has by not changing with the times, I suspect that there are probably tactics they are using now that we don't even understand. Like, for example, maybe mass likes or granting mass views to topics that are pro-Russian or just extremist. I suspect that a lot of the talking heads, YouTubers that push a really extreme viewpoint, I think I would be curious to know how many of their views are artificial or at least directed by something like the IRA. Anyway, Prigozhin also, of course, is subject to considerable international sanction. He has, in fact, faced U.S. criminal charges, but the U.S. State Department, of course, will give you $10 million if you can provide information that will lead to the arrest of Prigozhin or any other entities involved in U.S. in the 2016 election interference. He also, of course, is operating more and more in Africa. particularly the CAR. There's also rumors that currently the IRA is operating actually in Africa, right? Sort of like, well, basically co-opting the classic Nigerian prince scam, only now instead of Nigerian princes, they claim that they are actually the miners from Kentucky or the, black ultra nationalist from New York or whatever your demographic profile is. What's also fascinating is, of course, Prigozhin backs some Russian potential Russian allies. For example, the son of Muammar Gaddafi. He backed him in a bid to win the Libyan presidency in 2019. And of course, his wife owns a bunch of luxury day spas, a wellness center. But oddly enough, the true owner of his umbrella corporation, Concord Management and Consulting, is mommy. That's sweet. Anyway, guys, I hope this helps you understand when I talk about Prigozhin, what kind of guy he is and who he aspires to be, right? He is a dyed-in-the-wool criminal for sure. He has evolved with the times and really gone from a small-time petty hot dog seller up to Putin's right-hand man. And his ambition is as big as his catering contracts. Anyway, if you guys want the combat video breakdowns that are too spicy for YouTube, that YouTube just won't let me show you anymore, you can head over to the Patreon. Thanks so much to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who make this whole channel possible, and I'll see you all in the next one.